Adrian Cole grew up in a world far from glamour. His childhood was simple, defined by the scent of fresh laundry in a modest home and the sound of his mother humming softly in the kitchen. His father, Thomas Cole, a retired Army man who now ran a small auto repair garage, believed in discipline and integrity above all things. His mother, Martha, was warmth itself, always quick with a meal, a prayer, or a word of encouragement. Their little home never held riches, but it was rich in the things that mattered. Adrian carried those lessons into adulthood. He wasn't destined for greatness in the eyes of the world, but he worked with quiet pride. He studied, he struggled, and after a string of odd jobs, bartending, working construction, stocking shelves at the local market, he found his footing managing a sporting goods store in town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. He had learned to be content with little, and he thought he knew what kind of life awaited him, until the day he met Victoria Steele. Victoria belonged to a world he had only seen from the outside. The Steele family name carried weight in business circles, whispered with a mixture of admiration and envy. They owned hotels, properties, and investments spread across cities. They drove sleek cars, attended galas, and commanded attention wherever they went. Edward Steele, Victoria's father, was a man whose mere handshake felt like a business deal. Catherine Steele, her mother, embodied elegance with an edge. Her smiles were poised, her silences sharp. Adrian met Victoria at Charity Marathon. He was there through the sporting goods store, handing out supplies to runners, while she represented her family's foundation. She wore simple running gear, but there was something about her confidence, her laughter, the way she carried herself that drew people in. When she spoke to him, it was casual, almost effortless. He never believed someone like her would notice someone like him, yet she did. That first conversation stretched into a friendship, and friendship turned slowly into something deeper. They shared coffees at small cafes, long walks along quiet streets, nights sitting in his old car talking about dreams and fears. For Adrian, it was a dream he didn't dare wake from, a woman born into unimaginable wealth choosing him, a man of little means, because of who he was and not what he had. But love stories that cross worlds rarely unfold without shadows. When the Steele family discovered their daughter's choice, storm clouds gathered quickly. Edward invited Adrian to dinner at their mansion, a place so vast and polished that Adrian felt out of place from the moment he stepped inside. The meal was less about conversation and more about interrogation. Edward asked questions with the tone of a prosecutor. How much did he earn? What were his ambitions? Did he really believe he could provide Victoria the life she was used to? Every answer Adrian gave seemed to vanish into the air, never enough. Catherine hardly needed to speak. One arched eyebrow, one cool glance across the table, was sharper than any words. Adrian sat through it politely, but inside he felt the weight of their judgment pressing him down. Still, Victoria held his hand under the table. That simple gesture was enough to remind him why he endured it. He told himself love was worth every discomfort. The real test came when Edward called him into his office weeks later. The polished mahogany desk, the leather-bound books, the framed photos of Victoria's ancestors, all of it spoke of legacy, of wealth that spanned generations. Edward placed a folder on the desk and slid it toward him. It's simple, Edward said. Before we set a wedding date, you'll sign this. Adrian opened the folder. It was a prenuptial agreement. He skimmed through the pages. Every clause was designed to protect the Steele fortune. Family properties, trust funds, investments, all would remain solely Victoria's. Any inheritance would be hers alone. He was to have no claim. It was clear they saw him not as a husband but as a potential threat. Yet one clause caught his eye. Any windfall acquired during the marriage, lottery winnings, game show prizes, unexpected gains, would be considered marital property. It seemed almost an afterthought, buried among legal jargon. Adrian hesitated. His father's words echoed in his mind. If a deal feels too one-sided, son, trust your gut. But then he looked at Victoria. She wasn't saying anything, just standing off to the side, her expression unreadable. That silence hurt more than Edward's sharp tone. Still, Adrian's love for her outweighed every doubt. He told himself it was just paper, a formality, something to appease her parents. Love was the real contract, and love was all that mattered. With a steady hand, he signed. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle. Held by a lake under the open sky, it was a kind of ceremony people wrote about in magazines. Chandeliers glowed in white tents, violins played softly, and the Steele family's wealth was on full display. Adrian's parents stood at the edge of it all, overwhelmed but proud. Martha's tears slipped freely, a mix of joy and worry. Thomas shook his son's hand and whispered, "Never forget, respect is worth more than gold. Don't let anyone strip you of that." The newlyweds began their life in a luxury condo, its down payment courtesy of Edward Steele. Adrian contributed each month toward the mortgage, paying bills, handling groceries, doing what he could to pull his weight, but it never felt like theirs. The Steeles treated it like an extension of their empire. Furniture arrived unannounced. Interior designers swept through without warning. Catherine would comment on improvements, as though Adrian's opinions didn't matter at all. Whenever he voiced frustration, Victoria brushed it off. "They're just trying to help," she'd say, though Adrian knew better. Help wasn't supposed to feel like control. 2 years slipped by. They had their share of laughter, quiet mornings, and tender moments. Yet cracks appeared in the foundation. Adrian noticed changes in Victoria. The woman who once loved small cafes now demanded reservations at the most exclusive restaurants. The girl who used to smile at simple gifts now expected luxury brands. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to resemble her parents in manner and expectation. Adrian tried to hold on. He reminded himself of their early days, of coffee-stained tables and stolen kisses in his old car. But sometimes he wondered if those days belonged to another lifetime. And then came the day that shattered everything. Adrian was at work when his phone rang. He answered, expecting a casual check-in, but Victoria's voice came through in a breathless rush. "Adrian, you won't believe this. I won the lottery. $12 million. Can you imagine? $12 million. For a moment, Adrian couldn't breathe. His mind spun with possibilities. Freedom from bills, trips they had always dreamed of, a chance to live without the constant shadow of her parents. He imagined them laughing together, planning adventures, starting fresh on their own terms. But he didn't know then that this wasn't the start of their new life. It was the beginning of the end. Adrian rushed home that night, still buzzing with disbelief. $12 million. He had rehearsed in his head what he would say, how he would sweep Victoria into his arms, how they would dream together like they once did. He pictured her beaming with joy, the two of them mapping out their future far from her parents' suffocating reach. But when he walked into the condo, the air felt different. Victoria was seated at the kitchen counter, her phone beside her, a glass of wine half finished. She looked radiant, yet her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Adrian," she said, as if greeting a guest rather than her husband. "Isn't it incredible? 12 million. He set his bag down, moved closer, but noticed the untouched lottery ticket placed carefully on the marble counter. The numbers printed in black ink seemed unreal. "It's beyond incredible," he breathed. "Do you realize what this means? We could start over. No more leaning on your parents. No more living under their shadow. We could buy our own home, travel, live the life we always talk about." Her lips curved faintly, but not with the warmth he expected. "Yes, we could." She swirled her wine, staring at it as if the answer lay in the dark liquid. "But things are different now." Adrian frowned. "Different how?" Before she could reply, her phone lit up. The name on the screen, Mother. Victoria answered swiftly, her tone shifting into the polished, clipped voice she always used with Catherine. Adrian stood there, listening to her side of the conversation. Her nods, her polite, "Yes, of course," her soft laugh that sounded rehearsed. When she hung up, she set the phone down and looked at him almost apologetically. "My parents want to celebrate. They've already arranged a dinner. They said it's important we do this properly." Adrian felt the first crack. She said, but the decision wasn't theirs. It was theirs only because her parents had willed it. He said nothing, though. He told himself it was just the initial shock, that things would balance out. The dinner was held at the Steele mansion. Adrian sat at the long table. the glittering chandelier above them, the meal elaborate enough to feed 20. Edward still raised a glass, his tone solemn but his eyes sharp. To Victoria, he said, a daughter who brings not only pride but fortune to this family. $12 million, an opportunity to expand, invest, and secure the Steele legacy even further. Adrian froze mid-bite. He waited, thinking Edward would add something about them, about the marriage, about building a life together. But no, the toast was to the family's legacy, not to Victoria and Adrian, not to their future. Throughout the evening, Catherine made subtle remarks. We'll need financial advisors to manage the winnings, she said smoothly. I've already contacted someone. We'll ensure everything is structured under Victoria's name. That will be safest. Adrian's jaw tightened. Why under her name? We're married. Catherine's eyes flicked to him, her smile sharp enough to cut. Because she is the winner, Adrian. The ticket was hers. The rest of the dinner blurred into a haze. By the end of the night, Adrian felt more like an outsider than a husband. Days passed. Victoria became harder to reach, her schedule filling with meetings arranged by her parents, financial advisors, lawyers, accountants. People Adrian had never met now surrounded her. She stopped asking him for opinions, stopped sharing details. When he pressed, she grew irritated. Adrian, stop worrying. My parents know what they're doing. This is bigger than us. Bigger than us, he repeated, his chest tightening. It's supposed to be about us. About our life. Or have you forgotten we're in this together? She looked away, and in that silence he heard the truth. She had forgotten, or maybe she had chosen to. Then came the day everything collapsed. Adrian returned from work to find his key card no longer opened the condo's door. Confused, he knocked, and when Victoria finally answered, she looked at him as though he were a stranger. There's no easy way to say this, she began, her voice calm but rehearsed. I filed for divorce. The word struck him like a blow to the chest. He staggered back, searching her eyes for a hint of hesitation, a trace of the woman he married. But she was composed, steady, as though she had been preparing for this moment for weeks. You can't be serious, he whispered. Her gaze hardened. I am. My parents have already arranged everything. You'll hear from our attorneys soon. Our attorneys? His voice cracked. Victoria, we promised each other. She flinched just slightly before regaining her mask. I'm sorry, Adrian. This is what's best. The door closed, and with it, so did the life they had built. Adrian stumbled back to his parents' house that night, carrying nothing but a duffel bag of clothes. Martha cried when she saw him, wrapping her arms around him as though he were a boy again. Thomas placed a steady hand on his shoulder, his voice low but firm. They think they've broken you. Don't let them. For days, Adrian drifted between anger and despair. He replayed their conversations, the dinners, the subtle glances from Catherine, the cold dismissals from Edward. It was all so clear now. He had been tolerated, not accepted. And when fortune struck, they made sure to cut him loose. But fate has a way of twisting even the most careful plans. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread before him, Adrian came across a copy of the prenup. He read it line by line, his eyes scanning words he had once ignored. And then he saw it. Clause 14. Unexpected windfalls. All winnings, prizes, or gains acquired by either spouse during the course of marriage shall be considered joint marital property. Adrian's breath caught. His heart began to pound. The very contract the Steeles had forced upon him. The weapon they thought would strip him of any claim, held within it the one clause that could turn everything around. The lottery winnings weren't Victoria's alone. By law, they belonged to them both. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Adrian felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but fire. The morning after Adrian discovered the clause, he barely slept. The prenup lay on the table like a loaded weapon, waiting to be used. His parents sat with him over breakfast, the air heavy with unspoken worry. Martha pushed toast across the table, though she knew he wouldn't eat. Thomas sat quietly, sipping his coffee, studying his son with the sharp eyes of a man who had seen wars of a different kind. You found something, Thomas finally said. Adrian nodded, tapping the claws with his finger. They thought they locked me out, Dad. But this changes everything. The winnings aren't just hers. They're ours. Legally, I have a claim. Martha leaned forward, her eyes widening. Then you can fight. You can't let them push you aside like this. But Thomas didn't smile. He set his cup down carefully. They won't give up easily. You know the Steels, they don't lose. If you choose this path, you better be ready for war. I'm ready, Adrian said, though the words shook in his chest. He found his lawyer the next day. Jonathan Hayes wasn't a flashy attorney with glossy ads on billboards. He was sharp, lean, and carried himself with a quiet confidence. His office smelled of leather and old books, walls lined with case files and victories. When Adrian explained the situation, Jonathan leaned back, steepling his fingers. So let me get this straight. Hayes said, they push you into a prenup, and now that same contract give you rights to the jackpot? That's irony at its finest. Adrian nodded. Can we win? A slow grin spread across the lawyer's face. I don't take cases I can't win, but you need to understand what you're up against. The Steels are wealthy, connected, ruthless. They'll try to bury you in motions, smear your name, drag this out until you break. Adrian's fist clenched. Let them try. The battle began quietly. First came the intimidation. One evening, Adrian returned to his parents' house to find a black car idling outside. The driver didn't move, just sat there watching. The same car appeared the next morning near the store where Adrian worked. Calls came in the night, silent at first, then a voice finally speaking. Richard Steels. You're making a mistake, Adrian. The man's tone was icy, each word deliberate. Take the settlement we're offering. Walk away with dignity. You'll never win against us. Adrian hung up without replying, his pulse hammering. Then came Catherine. She visited him at the store, gliding in like a queen surveying peasants. The customers turned their heads. She had that effect, commanding attention effortlessly. She approached him with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're a good man, Adrian, she said softly, placing a manicured hand on the counter. But you're not cut out for this fight. You'll only embarrass yourself and hurt Victoria in the process. Sign the papers, accept what we've offered, and you can still walk away with something. Adrian met her gaze steadily. Something? After they threw me out of my own home? After she filed for divorce behind my back? No, Mrs. Steele. I'll take what I'm owed. Nothing less. For the first time, Catherine's smile faltered. She leaned closer, her whisper sharp as a knife. You'll regret this. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. Jonathan Hayes prepared him for court. They met often, poring over documents, financial statements, copies of bank transfers. Adrian had receipts showing he contributed to the condo's mortgage, evidence of shared expenses, proof that their lives were entwined financially. Every small detail mattered. Hayes was relentless, drilling Adrian with practice questions, as if preparing him for war. Meanwhile, the Steels unleashed their army of lawyers. Court filings arrived daily, thick stacks of paper filled with legal jargon meant to confuse and overwhelm. They filed motions to dismiss, motions to delay, motions to bleed Adrian dry. Hayes parried each one with precision, never flinching. The first hearing arrived in a downtown courtroom with high ceilings and walls that smelled faintly of varnish. Adrian sat at the plaintiff's table, heart pounding, while across the room, Victoria sat with her parents, flanked by 3 attorneys in tailored suits. She looked beautiful as always, but her eyes refused to meet his. The opposing counsel argued aggressively. Your Honor, the winnings are the sole property of Mrs. Steele. The ticket was purchased individually, and the funds are entirely separate from Mr. Cole's contributions. Hayes rose calmly, his voice firm. With respect, the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties explicitly states that any winnings during the marriage are to be considered joint marital property. This clause is unambiguous. Mrs. Steele's legal team may wish to ignore it, but the law does not bend to convenience. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Adrian glanced at Victoria, hoping, just hoping, for some flicker of the woman he once knew. For a moment, Her mask cracked. She lowered her eyes, as if ashamed. But then Catherine's hand touched her arm, steadying her, and the wall between them grew higher. When the hearing ended, Hayes leaned over to Adrian. We landed the first blow. They didn't see that clause coming. But don't get comfortable, they'll strike back harder. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already gathered. Flashes exploded, questions fired. Mr. Cole, do you believe you're entitled to money? Mrs. Steele, are you being pressured by your parents? Is this love turned to greed? Security had to clear a path through the chaos. Back at his parents' home, Adrian collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Martha stroked his hair gently, while Thomas spoke with quiet pride. You stood tall today. That's all a man can do, stand tall. But Adrian knew this was only the beginning. The Steeles were wounded, and wounded predators were the most dangerous of all. And as night fell, he realized something. He wasn't just fighting for money anymore. He was fighting for dignity, for every moment of love that had been stolen from him, for the respect his father had taught him to never surrender. The weeks leading up to the final hearing were a blur of tension and silence. Adrian barely slept, haunted by whispers of betrayal and memories of the life he thought he had built. Every morning, his father reminded him to stay calm, to trust the process. His mother prayed over him at night, her hand on his shoulder, whispering that no matter what happened, he wasn't alone. Jonathan Hayes pushed harder than ever. Their small office became a war room stacked with files, receipts, printouts of text messages, even screenshots of bank transfers. They dissected every word of the prenup, sharpening their arguments like weapons. Adrian grew quieter with each meeting, not from doubt, but from focus. He wasn't just fighting for money. He was fighting against the way the Steeles had treated him, as though he were disposable. Meanwhile, the Steeles grew desperate. Rumors reached Adrian that Richard had tried to shuffle the winnings into a trust overseas. Catherine made another appearance, this time at his parents' doorstep. Martha met her at the door and refused to let her in. Adrian overheard Catherine's voice, sharp and furious. You don't know what you're getting into, she hissed. This will ruin him. Martha's reply was calm, firm. What ruins a man is betrayal. My son already survived that. He'll survive you too. The door slammed, leaving silence behind. The night before the hearing, Adrian sat with his father on the porch. Thomas lit his pipe, the glow soft in the dark. Tomorrow you'll walk into that courtroom, son, he said, voice low. And you'll walk out with your head high no matter what. That's what matters. You fight with truth, not with fear. Adrian nodded. He couldn't find words. His throat ached too much. The courthouse was buzzing with reporters when the day arrived. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Adrian walked past them without a word, Jonathan Hayes at his side like a shield. Across the steps, Victoria arrived between her parents, their entourage of lawyers surrounding them like a fortress. She looked pale, almost fragile, but her eyes remained fixed on the ground. Inside, the air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. The judge entered, stern and composed, commanding silence with a single glance. The Steeles' lead attorney rose first. He launched into a rehearsed speech about Adrian's minimal contributions, about the lottery ticket being Victoria's personal purchase. His voice dripped with condescension, painting Adrian as a man who latched onto wealth he never earned. Hayes rose slowly, adjusting his jacket. His tone was calm, but every word landed like a hammer. Your Honor, my client is not seeking to take what isn't his. He is seeking enforcement of the very contract that the Steeles themselves insisted upon. The prenuptial agreement written and signed by both parties clearly states, all financial windfalls during the marriage, including but not limited to lottery winnings, shall be considered marital property. The Steeles cannot now rewrite their own terms simply because those terms no longer serve them. He laid the document before the judge, pointing to the clause in bold print. The language is unambiguous. The law is clear. The judge's eyes scanned the papers. Silence filled the room. Then she looked at Victoria. Mrs. Steele, do you dispute that this is your signature on this contract? Victoria's voice trembled. No, Your Honor. Do you dispute that the ticket was purchased during your marriage? She shook her head. No. Richard shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Hayes continued. Furthermore, we have evidence that the ticket was purchased using a joint account debit card. The winnings, therefore, cannot be considered separate property, even if the prenup were somehow disregarded. He held up bank statements. This is not speculation. It is fact. The Steele's attorney scrambled, objecting, attempting to argue intent and misinterpretation, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. The contract speaks for itself. Intent is irrelevant when the language is this explicit. The atmosphere shifted. For the first time, Adrian felt the power tilt in his favor. He watched as Catherine whispered furiously to her lawyers, while Richard sat rigid, fists clenched. Victoria sat still, her eyes glistening, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the entire room pressed down on her. When it was Adrian's turn to speak, Hayes gave him a nod. He stood, his hands slightly shaking, but his voice steady. Your Honor, I never married Victoria for money. I married her because I loved her. I worked, I contributed, I built a life with her. When she won, I celebrated with her. And when she filed for divorce, I was blindsided, thrown out of my home as though I never mattered. I am not here for revenge. I am here because I will not be erased from my own marriage. I only ask for what the law already says is mine. The judge's expression softened just slightly. She turned to Victoria. Mrs. Steele, do you have anything to say before I give my ruling? For a moment, the courtroom held its breath. Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes flicked toward Adrian, then toward her parents. Richard's glare was enough to silence her. She shook her head. No, Your Honor. The judge leaned back. Very well. Here is my ruling. The court finds that the lottery winnings constitute marital property, as defined by the prenuptial agreement. The sum shall be equitably divided between both parties. Additionally, Mr. Cole shall be reimbursed for his contributions to the marital home from which he was unreasonably evicted. This court will not tolerate manipulation of the law for personal gain, no matter the wealth or influence involved. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. It was over. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Adrian stood frozen, his chest tight, his vision blurred. Hayes shook his hand firmly. You did it, he whispered. Richard Steele stormed out, his face thunderous. Catherine followed, livid. Victoria lingered, her eyes meeting Adrian's at last. Tears welled in them, but she said nothing. 1,000 words sat unspoken between them. Apologies, regrets, and the hollow remnants of a love that once was. Then she turned and walked away. Outside, reporters swarmed, but Adrian kept moving. His parents embraced him tightly, Martha's tears soaking his shirt. Thomas clapped his son's back with quiet pride. Weeks later, the settlement was finalized. The check was handed over, an amount that made Adrian's hands tremble as he held it. Not the full jackpot, but more than enough to change his life. Enough to rebuild. Enough to breathe. He used part of it to renovate his parents' home, gifting them comfort for their years of sacrifice. Another portion he invested carefully, determined not to squander what it cost him so dearly to win. As the months passed, Adrian found peace and simplicity again. The small things mattered. Morning coffee with his father, his mother's laughter echoing through the house, the quiet of evenings spent without dread. Victoria remained a ghost in his memories. Word reached him that her social circle had turned cold, whispers of scandal chasing her. He felt no triumph in that. Only sadness. She had once been the love of his life. But money, pride, and control had poisoned everything. And yet, there was a strange satisfaction in knowing that the very document they had forced him to sign, their weapon, had become a shield. It was poetic justice, sharp and undeniable. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Adrian stood in his parents' yard, breathing in the scent of freshly cut grass. For the first time in years, he felt free. Not rich, not poor, just free. They thought I was nothing, he murmured to himself. But I stood my ground, and I'm still standing. The war was over. The scars remained, but so did his dignity. And that, to Adrian, was worth more than $9 million. And with that, our story comes to an end. But the real story begins with your thoughts. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let me know in the comments.